It's called Stories and Stanza, and this series is called Fail With Me, where I explore what we are labeling as failure and try to give that message that it's okay to fail. We pack it in a box and we
Uh-huh.
say that's failure, but we do not take the time to understand that failure or what we packed in there.
Just going to be very open and honest with you and say that this is probably one of my Achilles heels. As a victim, survivor, overcomer in his lifetime, before he even started KFC, before he came across that recipe, he actually failed at over 30 businesses. Failure is not the issue, it's just continuing and using it as a learning opportunity. That's probably one of the cheapest and most effective tools that you can have for dealing with emotions and trauma, and that's journaling. You learn to become a student of yourself. Writing, it's been my best friend. It's been my supervisor. It's been my venting tool. And so for me, that's probably the biggest tool that I use.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Stories and Stanza. And Jamie, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you very much.
I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And the subject that we are going to talk about is great interest to me, the trauma, the healing, and resilience. And we have covered that from time to time on this podcast. It's called Stories and Stanza, and this series is called Fail With Me, where I explore what we are labeling as failure and try to give that message that it's okay to fail. So
Uh-huh.
that's a little bit of a background for anyone who has joined us for the first time. Before we get into our discussion, Jamie, would you like to introduce yourself to our audience, please?
Sure. So my name is Jamie Hughes. I'm a social psychologist, author, speaker, life coach. I have my bachelor's and master's in psychology. My master's was specialized in trauma, self-care, and resilience. And I've written one scholarly paper that was published about mental illness and stress related issues among law enforcement. And then most recently, I finished publishing my fourth book in a series called Managing Mental Health. And each book deals with a specific issue. So the four books are about anxiety, depression, adult ADHD, and PTSD. And they're all meant to be very practical in the sense that they're all this similar format. They start off with kind of an understanding. So we get a better understanding of the issues, kind of a little bit of history, but not too much to be deep scholarly, and then go into, like I said, very practical steps that people can take to improve mental health symptoms in the immediate and in the long term. And so that's where we're at today. And I'll kind of fill in some blanks as we go along.
Thank you so much. What you are working on, as I mentioned earlier, it's a great area of interest for me. And I have not been a student of psychology, but I am a big reader on this subject and I love to explore and understand people through this podcast. And from time to time, we bring in that this Fail With Me series where we look into the some of the areas that we usually keep locked in our mind. Okay, that is
Uh-huh.
why I chose the title Fail With Me, as in if we fail and then we get all these emotions, different feelings, and then we pack it in a box and we
Uh-huh.
say that's failure. but we do not take the time to understand that failure or what we packed in there. So that is how this concept came up, that I started saying that it's okay to fail. And I
Mhm.
started this initially to talk about my own story. So I had a few difficult years, and when I came out of it, I felt curious that I should try to unpack that. And that's how this podcast happened. And after I started getting more and more requests from guests to be on part of the fail with me narrative.
Uh-huh.
And I really like that. I just thought that this is my own story, but the
Mhm.
response that I've got from both speakers and listeners alike, that it's a very interesting psychological pillar to get into
Yes.
and understand. So, the
Yes.
first thing I would like to hear from you is, you are a psychologist and you have been practicing for a long time. So, how do you feel about the theme that I just shared, like fail with me, acceptance of failure? What's your personal take on that?
So just going to be very open and honest with you and say that this is probably one of my Achilles heels. As a victim, survivor, overcomer, whatever you want to label it, of childhood trauma, of psychological abuse, failure has always been a tough spot for me. And it has taken many years to reframe that into what you're describing. And what you're describing is absolutely correct. It's the way it should be. We should look at failure as not a nail in the coffin, not a personal blithe on who we are, but as a learning opportunity, and which is what it is. If you're not taught that, if you're taught the opposite, it's very difficult to overcome, but it's very important. And once you do overcome it, you, it opens up a whole new world into how you approach things. You almost become eager to fail. So just this is a really very simple example that I learned years and years ago. And I probably learned it from a really good author, but I don't remember which book I read it in. But if the American restaurant KFC that has locations around the world, Kentucky Fried Chicken, you can go to China, you can go to South America, you can go KFC. So the guy that is famous for starting KFC, you've seen little cartoon images of him as the older white Southern man with the beard and the hat and glasses. And he actually failed at over 30 businesses in his lifetime before he even started KFC, before he came across that recipe. So he was well in his, I guess it was his 60s, maybe early 60s, before he even started KFC. And now they have restaurants all over the world. So the failure is not the issue. It's just continuing and using it as a learning opportunity. So definitely important topic.
Thank you. Recently, one of my guests, who is a surgeon, and he came to me, he became a motivational speaker as well later in his life, and he said that a lot of people in even in medical profession, they need to understand what failure is and what they're labeling as failure. So he really
Yes.
congratulated me for picking this theme and talking about it. And to me, it's also an area, the way I set an example for anyone around me.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of one of the most important kind of turning point in my own life as well. I used to be
Uh-huh.
very angry and bitter and frustrated and jittery all the time. And then something happened and I started understanding myself a lot better.
Mhm.
And then I came across all these different mental blocks, and then I found my own way of digging into it and resolving it, which was not possible before that journey began.
Mhm.
So it's very important for my healing factor, my well being, and that is
Mhm.
what I try to bring in this podcast. So it'll be interesting to hear from you more as we go ahead in this episode. So, would you like to tell us about your books first?
Sure. Yeah. So the books, I just started the series recently. Like I said, I've got four published now. I've got working on number five. I have eight total planned for the series. I think one of the one of the interesting things about the books is they're extremely useful and practical for people that are experiencing these mental health issues, whether it's the depression, anxiety, PTSD, or ADHD. But they're also very powerful for the loved ones, family members, and friends of people that experience these issues because they often don't get the explanation of why this is happening, why people have certain behaviors or reactions like they do. So, for instance, just with adult ADHD, one thing that's common is you can be doing something and there's a distraction, and you turn and you go to deal with that distraction, and then you just totally forget what you were doing before. And so people looking from the outside in see that and they're like, God, this person's really scatterbrained, or they're just dumb, or maybe they're not trying hard enough. And they don't understand that there's literally like a disconnect in the brain between the learning and the doing for ADHD. And so when the ideas for the books actually started years ago. I used to work in a domestic violence center, and I worked there for many years in program development and management. Loved it. But one thing I noticed was that even though our team was extremely dedicated and hardworking and caring, we were working off of research and understanding that was years old. There was there were things in the field of domestic violence that were more current, and we weren't using them. And the resources really weren't publicly available for domestic violence agencies as a whole in the US. And so I was like, oh, we should be able to do something more about this. We should be able to be more progressive and up to date. And so when I finally got the opportunity to go back for my master's degree, I just had that kind of desire within me that whatever I learned, I wanted to share. I didn't know how. I didn't want to be a teacher, stand up in front of a classroom, but I definitely wanted to share that information with people. That was stuff that was current. And that was one of the reasons also that I specialized in trauma was from my personal experience, I had the background. From my work experience, I had the background. And so I wanted to know where were we scientifically? Where were we in practice in dealing with trauma and be able to share that? And so that's kind of where I guess, the initial desire for the books came. And so once I finished my master's degree, started writing them, and that's where we end up now. So they're I did them in the ebook format, so they're very affordable and available all over the world. So no matter where you're at, you can find them and order them. And like I said, get some practical steps to decreasing symptoms and building long-term healing.
Thank you. And for our listeners, I would like to say that we'll put the book links in our episode description. Doesn't matter which platform you if you're watching or you're listening to this episode, you'll be able to find out the book links in the episode description. And then if you like this podcast episode, then you can go over there and check the books out.
Okay.
I'd like to take a slight detour from our conversation and bring up something that I just popped up. So, in mental health challenges, what my experience is, people going through it often cannot articulate their problem.
Mm.
So, something happened to my wife a couple of years ago, and we just became parents. And we were new in Australia, and she started going into like severe anxiety and depression. And I didn't understand what she was going through
Uh-huh.
because there was not enough literature on that around me. And whenever I went to doctors for support, I was told that it's a phase, it'll pass. And it was not a phase that would pass. It took a good 4 or 5 years to
Mm.
get to the bottom of it and then get the right amount of support to stabilize things. So it was
Mm.
a long path. And in that phase, what I realized is that I was struggling to understand where things are at. When she started getting better, I found a book was written by a psychologist and who articulated the symptoms very accurately, which matched my wife's condition. I have great respect for the writer to help me understand because I was not in my wife's head to understand
Right.
what she was going through. I was just taking her to doctors. That's it. I was just at a satellite kind of a support system. But when I
Yeah.
read the book, it helped me understand what the victim is going through, what the
Yes.
patient is going through. And it kind of ties back to what you said that why you started writing the books and it helps us understand the conditions a little bit better. And and you mentioned that you when you started working you felt that there was that lack of literature
Mhm.
related to domestic violence. So I'm just keen to hear your experience in that space as to how we can understand mental illness better. Or you can pick some areas that you have written about. I just would
Uh-huh.
love to get your views on that. How we can understand people who are having mental illness.
Yeah. So the first thing I think that's important for us to understand, if we're the loved one, if we're the family member, the friend, coworker, just society in general, is some of this is historical. All medicine that we deal with is historical. It's gone through learning curves. Before the invention of penicillin, people died with infections like on a weekly basis, that kind of thing. So current mental health understanding is has really only been in place about 100 years, a little over 100 years. And we've learned a lot since then. There's been a lot of learning curves, and there's probably still a lot to go. Modern medicine, at least in quote Western societies, UK, British, Australian, has more heavily relied on what can be practically done. In other words, is there a medicine that you can take? There's been a distancing from what's now called alternative medicine or traditional medicine, as if it were ineffective 400 or 500 years ago. It worked fine for them then. We've just sort of changed and evolved, but now we're seeing kind of our way back to a lot of that. And I say that to as part of your question is that our understanding is that these issues aren't necessarily new, although they are compounding. They have compounded greatly. The numbers are just mind-blowing over the past 100, 150 years. And a lot of that has to do with changes in lifestyle. So the fact that we see more people with mental illness symptoms or diagnosis, more children with cognitive disorders, emotional disorders, it's not surprising because of where we're at now, the societies that we've created. We've distanced ourselves from nature. We've distanced ourselves from family bonding and community bonding. So that's not a surprise that all these things have had an effect. The other One of the other things that's important for us to understand with people that have mental illness symptoms or conditions is that these things are not just in the mind. It's not just a memory. Okay. My part of my story is when I was growing up as a teenager, my father was psychologically abusive. I was constantly told I was worthless, that I was stupid, that I would never be able to accomplish anything, those kinds of things. The effect that it had on me the rest of my life, and as I mentioned before, the concept of failure, it wasn't just from a memory. So it's not just a matter of saying, oh, well, why don't you just get over that? That was something 20 or 30 years ago. Why can't you just change your belief about that? It's not that simple. These things actually take root and change your body so that your nervous system, your endocrine system, your immunity system, your digestive system, all of these things in your body are changed from trauma. So when you see something going on with a loved one and you're like, well, yeah, this behavior, this isn't normal, or I can tell that they're hurting. No, I may not know exactly what's going on in their mind, but you know for a fact that it's not something that they're just making up. It's not something that they're just refusing to change. This is something going on in their body and in their brain. So I guess the probably the another point to think of is that one, all mental health is on a spectrum. So a person might have a little bit of depression. They might have a lot of depression. They might have a little bit of anxiety, may have a lot of anxiety. They might only have anxiety in public, in crowds. They might not have it at home by themselves or with family members, or vice versa. So understand there's on a spectrum. Because someone has certain symptoms doesn't mean that they're not dealing with real problems. It's just on a spectrum. They may have a little or a lot. And so, like you mentioned, digging in, try your best to find literature or coaches or videos or something that can help you understand the processes that are going on in their body and their mind that will help you be supportive.
Thank you for explaining that. Yes, I totally understand where you're coming from, and I have seen that firsthand. As in, if you're a lot of times, like what we are feeling is because of something that happened somewhere in your body. So you had signs that is telling you that it's affecting your mental health. So it's a wonderful perspective. And we often ignore that. We just think that it's in our head, but we got that symptom a long time ago. I have seen it myself. I've been working in IT for last 20 years, and I've
Uh-huh.
seen like the symptoms of stress and burnout from time to time. And then I realized that before it actually hit me, it was giving me indications that it
Yes.
is going to affect me. I want to hear from you, as in you mentioned your own journey with healing in the beginning and
Uh-huh.
your background. So you are in a profession where you help people heal and come out of their trauma. How did
Uh-huh.
you heal yourself? What was your own path? Would you like to share with the audience?
Yeah, sure. It's my my journey in healing is very much like other people's in the terms that it's not very direct, it's messy, it takes time. And there is no A to B path. When so I started experiencing depression when I was 9 years old after my mother died. And then, as I mentioned earlier, I was raised in my father by my father, and it was not good. So all of my trauma continued for years and years, and undiagnosed and untreated. The very first, even beginning part of being introduced to healing was when I was 18. I had a suicide attempt. And so I went into the hospital and I was in a psychiatric hospital for 1 month. That was the first time I'd ever talked to anybody about my problems, had any kind of direction or help. So my, my path started later, years later. And even then, it wasn't just start and then keep going. It was off and on for many years, probably until my late, well, probably about my mid 20s, because I didn't even start college until my mid 20s. And I went to a community college and got an associate's degree in psychology. And I just fell in love with it. So, and part of that was because it was helping me understand myself, helping me understand why I had certain fears, certain self-concepts. It was fascinating to learn. I was like, wait a minute, I don't just think bad about myself because I'm a loser or because I'm just such a horrible person. I might think bad about myself because of the way I was raised. Maybe I was taught to think that way. And that was just so, it began to be liberating. I began to see some freedom from that. So, learning about mental illness, learning that depression wasn't something I could just get over and just think happy thoughts and everything will be all right tomorrow. Learning that, oh, wait a minute, this is actually a real thing and it has an effect on your mind and body and your behaviors. So learning those things was the very beginning. And so I kept at it because I was very passionate about it and ended up continuing, got my bachelor's degree. Interestingly enough, and I think this kind of bodes well for, I think this bodes well for everybody, not just those in helping professions. But when I was getting my bachelor's degree, my intent was to go into therapy. And I wanted to be a therapist for teenage boys. Go figure. Most of my trauma was as a teenage boy, so that's who I wanted to help. And a friend of mine worked at a boys' shelter in a city near me. So he got me an internship there. And I went and started working with some of the boys there, and they were like everything from ages like 8 and 9 all the way up to 18. And it was so difficult. It was so emotionally heavy that it just broke me down. I would go home and cry at nights because I would talk to a 12-year-old boy and he would say, "Yeah, both parents are in jail, and I've been in the system for 4 years, and I time out next week, which means I don't have any foster care placement. I don't have anything, so I'll be living on the streets." And it just was horrible. I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And I know now part of that was because I was still healing myself. But two, it was just my my personality. I wanted to do something to help them. And I couldn't in that position. I could only talk and listen, which was needed and is important, but it just wasn't for me. So when I finished my, my bachelor's degree, that's when I ended up going into nonprofit program development and management. So I could do something. I had the knowledge and the empathy and compassion about the issues and for the people, but I could do something to support them and do something to see that they were getting help. And I think that's good for all of us because even when you have a desire or a passion, there's many ways to help people, and there's different ways to go into a field, whether it's helping profession or not. Just like you mentioned IT, there are people that are software developers, there are people that are hardware gurus who know everything about the circuits and the electricity and the framework and all that stuff. And there's people that are salespeople that sell applications and all those kind of things. So there's many different ways. As I continued to grow, I just kept working on it, on my healing. Went to therapy off and on. I would go to therapy sometimes and just get as much as I could out of it. And I, some of my poor therapists, I stressed them out because I was so, I guess, so involved in the process that we would reach a point to where I was out questioning them. And if anyone's going to therapy, let me challenge you to do that. Out question them. Don't just depend on them. They don't know you. They don't know what you need. They're there to help guide you and help kind of see you to the next step. But you got to take it in your own hands. You got to push it. You got to push it. Say, hey, look, I love what we're talking about, but what about this? I'm still having problems with this. Can we work on this area? And so I kept doing that and just continued to grow and heal, continued to look for tools. I became interested in journaling, and that was a huge help. That's probably the one of the cheapest and most effective tools that you can have for dealing with emotions and trauma, and that's journaling. You learn to become a student of yourself. And then, like I said, ended up working for a domestic violence center, doing program management and development there, loved it, and then finally got the opportunity to go back and work on my master's degree. So that's the healing takes time, and don't get discouraged if it seems like you reach a milestone and then all of a sudden, nope, you're right back dealing with the issue, or it feels like you haven't quite conquered it yet. Life should always be about growth, always. Because if you're not growing, you're not alive. So, so you should always just keep learning and keep growing and keep working on issues.
That is so beautifully explained. And I just wanted to get into a little bit more on this part that I once I started this podcast and people saw that I'm talking about things like, of course, healing and anger management, self-awareness, that sort of thing. A lot of my friends, people around me started approaching and asking me, how are you doing this? How are you doing this? And
Uh,
I realized that in that process, they are passing on what they're keeping to themselves onto me. And I'm not a professional in that space.
uh,
And I told everyone that you should go and seek help. And what I'm doing in my podcast is basically for information and education
yeah,
perspective. It's not a thumb rule that you can follow for healing.
uh,
It brings you to a baseline and then you need to work on it.
mhm,
But still, I realized that in that process, people are downloading their stuff onto me, which I was not ready for or not never trained for. And then
uh-huh,
I started saying no, that this is not my forte, this is not what I do for a living, and I'm not the right person you should be asking.
uh-huh.
And I'm just curious that you are in that field of helping people, and you talked a lot about how this process affected you and how you sought help as well in that process. So I'm just curious as to what is your support system like when you are helping someone else. Can you talk a little bit more on that?
So my support system when I'm helping someone else,
Yeah.
that's a good question. And for most professionals, you typically have a supervisor of some sort that will sit down with you and decompress on a regular basis. Might be once a month, whatever. If you're a therapist working for an organization, let's say, you should have a supervisor that monthly, at least monthly, sits down with you. How are you doing? How are things going? What's your caseload like? And helps you process those things. For me, a lot of it is writing. A lot of it is writing. It's been my best friend. It's been my supervisor. It's been my venting tool. And so for me, that's probably the biggest tool that I use. And some of this, when I call my friends and talk to my friends or have coffee or whatever, I've learned just over the years that even just normal conversations, even if we're not talking about, oh man, I'm dealing with this, I have this client and here's what they're dealing with, et cetera, et cetera. Even just getting away from that and having normal conversations helps decompress. So we have to try our best. And I'm a typical introvert. I'm a typical do-it-myself loner person. So I've at times in my life, I've had to be very intentional about keeping social circles and, calling and talking to my friends. It's never that I don't care about them anymore. I just kind of get lost in whatever I'm working on. And 2 or 3 weeks will go by and I'm like, oh, I haven't talked to this person or that person. So that's something I've had to learn about myself is that I need to make sure I call and talk to my kids. I need to call and talk to my friends. And so being intentional about keeping your social network and your relationships, no matter what they are, whether it's a spouse, whether it's friends, and it doesn't have to be about the work that you're doing. It's just normal stuff. It helps you remain a human being instead of just being a processing machine. So yeah, I would say between the writing and just being committed to keeping up with healthy relationships.
Thank you for sharing that. We talked about journaling and writing a little bit, and I recently published an episode with a guest who teaches journaling as a healing tool, and he gave me a very wonderful perspective that a lot of times we are journaling at the superficial level, which is like mindfulness journal or gratitude journal, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, travel and things like that. But it's such a powerful tool. If we can go beyond the surface, then it can provide us, like, it can let us tap into the true potential of the tool. And it's such a simple one.
Yes.
And yeah, and I have been journaling for years and years, and then it has evolved over time as to at what
Mhm.
level I am journaling. And I am a writer myself, so I see the
Okay.
power of this tool. I've published two poetry collections, and I think in a way they are a journal as well, because it's a reflection of what I
Absolutely.
was feeling at that
Absolutely.
point. And I want to hear from you, maybe more from a self-care perspective, that
Mhm.
how do you suggest one can journal effectively? How should they utilize this tool?
Yeah. So from a self-care perspective, um, journaling it's not used to old school. We heard about diaries. We don't hear that too much anymore. We've kind of transitioned away. Diary is more of like keeping notes of what's happening. It's kind of like a daily, hey, here's what happened today. Today I did this today. It was great for history because we've obviously learned a lot about what happened in previous times from people's diaries and stuff. Journaling is more about writing down your thoughts, feelings, and perspective. So for one, there's no really right or wrong way to go about it. So you don't have to worry about, okay, well, am I doing this right? What do I need to be doing different? You can just sit down, and if there's something weighing on your mind, and it doesn't have to be trauma per se, it could just whatever. Today I'm just like, I'm so busy. This is stressing me out. Just sit down and write that. Whatever your normal self-talk would be, that's what you write down in the journal. And the more you do it, just like anything else, just like a sport, just like exercise, whatever, a job, the more you do it, the better you get and the easier it becomes, at least in the sense of how you do it. One of the things in self-care that I always use, a tool that I teach, is to become a student of yourself, almost acting like a reporter would, a news reporter. So let's say you've been writing in your journal for a couple of weeks and you're just like, well, I enjoy it, but I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't know if it's helping me. Ask the 5 questions. Go back and look at your previous 2 weeks and then ask the 5 reporter questions. And I'm probably going to like bomb this, but who, what, why, where, and how? Is that right? Who, what, why, where, and how? Yes. Okay. I think I got those right. If I didn't, I'm not a reporter, but anyways, you look at yourself at what you've written and say, okay, why? Well, on this day, I seem to really frustrated. Why? And answer that question. Ask that about yourself. Oh, I noticed this whole week, I really didn't have much of anything to write. I couldn't think of anything. I wrote like one or two sentences and that was it. Why? What was going on? Where were you? Who were you with? And you might all of a sudden discover, well, that week I was like busy at work, but it was very satisfying. I just got a new contract. I was very happy to work on this new project. I was excited. And so you kind of start to realize, oh, well, there wasn't a lot of stress going on. Therefore, there wasn't a lot of heavy emotions. So that's one of the tools is just ask questions about your own writing and try to discover why and what was going on. And you can also just like Google writing prompts for self-healing, self-care. There's a lot, you can find thousands of them and pick some good ones, pick some challenging ones too. Don't just stick with, like you said, the surface level stuff. Intentionally pick some that are going to be challenging. Like, what's your favorite memory as a child? Why? What was happening? Who was involved? Where were you? What was the outcome? And then turn around and flip it. What's one of your worst memories of as a child? Why? Who was involved? Where were you? Those are ways to challenge yourself and learn to grow and start using it as growth and healing. And then, like you mentioned, over time, it will, you'll notice a difference. You'll start feeling comfortable with expressing yourself. And it's a great tool because, again, it's cheap, it's easy, it's private. You don't have to worry about spilling your guts to someone you don't know. This is to you. You don't have to tell anybody about it. So it's an amazing tool. And there's a lot of resources online that you can just look up for free that you can use and get started right away.
Very well said. I would just go a little bit deeper into the writing side of things because, as I said, that I'm being a writer, it's a great area of interest for me, and I have my own theory. I just wanted to bring it up and share with you and see what you think. From what I've seen working with mental health care professionals, therapists, and psychiatrists, is that one of the reasons or one of the key aspects of healing is recognizing something is not right.
Mhm.
You start cleaning your house when you realize it is dirty. It needs a
Yes.
cleaning.
Uh-huh.
And then if you start writing down or if you are journaling honestly, if you're reaching that level, it's a way you are recognizing or you are telling yourself or you are telling your logical brain that
Yes.
there is something not right. And the moment you recognize it, then your brain understands, okay, so this is not the right neural pathway, so to speak, to
Uh-huh.
look into this problem. There can be an alternate path to this, and that is when healing becomes if starts becoming effective. So the first and the hardest step is to understanding and recognizing that pattern. As a psychologist, what do you think that's a correct way of interpreting writing or
Oh,
journaling?
yeah, yeah. Yes. So journaling, a cool aspect about journaling is that it it allows you to reach the subconscious because you can think consciously and you can write down factual information. You can write down observations of, okay, here's what I feel, here's what I'm experiencing. But the more you go into it, the more you keep writing about that, the deeper it goes, and things start coming out from deeper levels, from the subconscious. And like you said, if you know that there's something going on, getting it out is just paramount. That's what you're doing in talk therapy. You're telling someone else the facts. You're telling them how you feel and what you're experiencing and what's happened to you in the past, but you're really just getting it out of your system. It has to come out, and that you can do that in journaling, and it helps that. It helps you start seeing a path to healing. You said that recognizing that there's a problem, and said the more you write it down, the more you recognize that. And you also recognize, even if you can't verbalize it, even if you can't put your finger on it and pinpoint it and understand it yet, there's something in you that recognizes that this is separate from you, that there is a part of you that wants to be healed, that wants healing, that wants wholeness and wellness. And there's a part of you that is meant for that. And that there's something, it's attached to me, it's a part of me, but it's still, there's some sense that it's separate. I don't like it. I don't want it. I don't want it. And journaling will help you discover that.
Thank you for explaining that. It's something I had in mind for a very long time, and I reckon that's how it works because in many cases, after I wrote it down, even maybe in passing, just in brief notes or something, that later became a bigger revelation for me. I can go on and on in this
Oh,
discussion,
yeah.
but in the interest of time, I'll just try to wrap it up very soon. And there's something I would like to hear from you. We talked a lot of things about trauma and healing and the path towards healing, how it looks like. And
Yes.
from what I have felt or observed is that some we think that trauma is a very severe, very deep negative emotion or a feeling of something that happened in the past, but it can be something apparently trivial that we are not aware of, like that happened and that gave us a trauma. In many cases, in many little things, and just for myself and people I speak to, as a psychologist, do you think that it is possible people are unaware of the trauma but they are behaving differently
Oh,
because of what they are keeping inside? I think it's a
yeah.
big subject, I mean.
You need to write that, just that one statement down, and you, you might be on the path to solving the world's problems. We are all affected by circumstances. We're all affected by genetics. And these two both play a part in us developing into who we are, into, more specifically, into our reactions and our behaviors. So, yes, you can have a minor, something that you would consider minor, something that you have a certain specific reaction to or behavior, and it could have come from some form of trauma. there was a study in the US back in the late 1990s that looked at childhood trauma. And it was a groundbreaking study. It's called the ACE study, ACE, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And the purpose of the study was really to show and prove, and it did very well, a connection between childhood trauma and adult disease. So, like, the more traumas a child experienced or the more severity, the higher their rate of physical illness in adulthood, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, digestive problems, immunity, all of it, all of it. And so this the the study went from a scale of how many specific events they experienced. So 0 up to 10 for this particular study. So you may have only had one on this list, and it can have a minor effect. It could affect something in your life. Like, I don't know, let's say that you grew up in poverty. Your family was very poor. You sometimes didn't have a full meal to eat, sometimes skipped meals because of that. But your mother and father were very loving and caring. They supported you, they encouraged you. There was no abuse. So the other things in your life went well. Well, guess what? You could still grow up, and that the fact that you lived through that experience, that type of experience, you as an adult, you might like you might be the one where when you get to the toothpaste, you're squeezing every little last drop of that toothpaste out until it's like can't even survive anymore. It is a one little drop of toothpaste, and you're going to get it out and you're going to use it. And to you, that's just like, oh, well, this is just part of my personality. This is just kind of the way I am. I'm very frugal. Well, it could be because when you were a child, you developed internally a fear of missing out, of not having enough to eat, not having enough resources. So that has developed. So there are things like that. And then it goes to the opposite end of the scale as well, to where repetition and severity of trauma develops other habits, other behaviors. There's a whole, and I'm sure you've heard about this, attachment theory. So, attachment theory basically says because of the connection or disconnection with your loving parent as a child, that shaped the way that you subconsciously see and experience relationships as an adult. So you might be avoidant, you might be anxious. So all of those things can affect our reactions to stimuli coming in and our behaviors, the way we present ourselves and do things. All of this is very fascinating and interesting to me, and that's my line of work and study. But yeah, exploring those things in terms of trauma and learning about yourself is can help you grow. Sometimes it can help you break cycles. Sometimes they're not serious enough to break. Like if you're getting the last drop of toothpaste, great. You're saving money somewhere down the line. So that's not a bad thing. But if it develops into disorders where you're hoarding or having repetitive actions, then those are things you want to get help for and start working on. But yeah, it's very interesting.
It's amazing to hear from you. We have used up the hour for our discussion, and I could go on. I was just thinking that maybe we can record a separate episode as well as a continuation of this. Would you be open to
Sure.
that?
Yep.
Wonderful.
I
Yeah.
would enjoy it.
Yeah. It was really great talking to you. And I'll just wrap up today's discussion. with a question, and that's something we don't have to answer today. That it's something maybe we can take for our next discussion. When people go into therapy, it's not often very goal oriented. Like
Mhm.
it, people go into therapy and they just don't have a clear pathway of where they are coming out of it, and they are stuck in that process. I would love to hear from you as to what do you think is could be the problem here, and is there something that we could explore? But you don't have to answer me right away. Would you like to talk about it, or maybe we can record a
Uh,
separate episode on this line?
So yeah, that could be a deeper discussion. I could add this very quickly is if you are going into therapy, ask that question. Very first, when you're doing your initial consultation, ask it. Say, what's going to be the goal for this and how are we going to get there? That lets the
Wonderful.
therapist know, hey, look, we need a plan and let's go by the plan. So that will help you get what you need out of it.
Thank you for your time today. It was absolutely delightful to speak to you, to hear about your experience and your knowledge and your subject matter expertise on this subject. It's a very deep and kind of never ending discussion. We can go
Yes.
and explore many things. So I'd like
Yep.
to thank you for your time, and I'll get the book links and I'll put them in the episode description. And we will
Yep.
find another time in your calendar
All
so that
right.
I can invite you back to Stories and Stanza for another episode.
Absolutely. Would love it.